Hello, everyone. I am so honored and grateful for the opportunity to present my final project to you on preparing relative and kinship caregivers to embrace shared parenting. My name is Danielle Davis, and I currently work as a program supervisor for the state of Connecticut Department of Children and Families. During this presentation, I will begin by telling you a little bit more about myself. I will provide an overview of my action research project, discuss the plan phase, interventions and methodology. I will discuss the evaluation and results, and I will end this presentation by reviewing the lessons learned throughout this action research project, the next steps, and the impact that MPLD has had on my life, both personally and professionally. Well, here is a little bit more about me. As I indicated earlier, I am currently a program supervisor for the best child welfare agency in the United States, none other than the state of Connecticut Department of Children and Families. Despite the many challenges that we face as child welfare professionals, I am so happy to work for a great agency where I'm able to impact the lives of so many families in a positive way. I have worked for DCF for over 19 years. I started as a social worker trainee in the ongoing treatment services unit and later transitioned to investigations, where I worked as an investigator, and later I was promoted as an investigations supervisor. I have also supervised ongoing treatment services, probate, and permanency. And I currently work in the New Haven area office, where I oversee trainees, ongoing treatment, and a high-risk newborn unit. In addition to working at DCF, I currently am in my final year of my doctoral program at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, working on a doctorate in education with a concentration in organizational leadership. I have a passion for working with children and families, but I have a special passion for empowering women and reminding them of who they are, most of all, reminding them that they have been fearfully and wonderfully made. Lastly, I absolutely love to travel, and my preferred method of traveling is cruising. Now that you know a little bit more about me, let's get into my action research project. I chose to focus on kinship care in conjunction with the Quality Parenting Initiative. Kinship care is very dear to me because I truly believe in keeping kids with their families. I was fortunate to be raised by a mother and father, and I have a strong family background. Unfortunately, we know that in child welfare, that is not always the case, and that it's not always in the child's best interest to remain in the home with their biological parents, depending on several safety factors. However, when a child or children are not able to remain in the home with their parents, I truly believe that we as child welfare professionals should do everything that we can to keep children with kin. Now, we're going to look at a few definitions throughout this presentation. We're going to talk about what kinship care is, as well as fictive kin. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Quality Parenting Initiative, as well as define shared parenting. Kinship care refers to the care of children by relatives or close family friends, often referred to as fictive kin, either temporarily or an alternative caregiver arrangement or through formal licensing. A kinship caregiver provides full-time care, nurturing, and protection of children when a child cannot remain safely at home. Fictive kin refers to an individual who is not related by birth, adoption, or marriage to a child, but who has an emotionally significant relationship with the child or an emotionally significant relationship with the biological parent, sibling, or half-siblings. In addition to children being placed with kin, I believe that it's important for children to maintain a connection with their parents if it is appropriate. It is important for children to see the camaraderie between kinship providers and birth parents. Now, the Quality Parenting Initiative is a national movement for foster care change, and it is made up of a network of states, counties, and private agencies committed to ensuring that all children in care have excellent parenting and lasting relationships so that children can grow and thrive. QPI is built on the belief that excellent parenting with strong positive relationships are the best interventions we can offer children to enable them to heal as they grow up to become adults. Creating a system that ensures excellent parenting requires the support and involvement of birth families, relative caregivers, foster families, young people, and others in the child welfare system. Now let's look at the definition of shared parenting. Shared parenting is, although foster parents do not necessarily live in the home with the birth parents, they partner with the birth family to help prepare all family members for reunification. Foster parents work to support positive, supportive relationships with birth parents while keeping the child's best interest in mind and helping the child to develop secure attachments. DCF's mission is grounded in a core set of 7 aspirational targets that drive the department's strategic goals for how to best meet the needs and serve Connecticut's children and families. For my action research project, I chose to focus on the second aspirational goal, which is that 70% of children or more who cannot remain in their homes will be in homes with kin. So in speaking to my mentor, Tony Lagan, we discussed ways to improve our kinship numbers, and we also discussed how we can get staff to utilize the Quality Parenting Initiative, which will improve and strengthen communication between kinship providers and birth parents, and will ultimately lead to shared parenting and improved permanency. So how can we reach this goal? Let's take a look at my PICO. My PICO states, if a conversation guide is provided and staff are trained on how to utilize it to prepare relatives and kinship providers on how to actively participate in the overall efforts to improve well-being of children, including better communication and shared parenting, will it improve permanency outcomes? In looking at the literature, I gained additional insight regarding kinship from Casey Family Programs and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I also obtained background information on our DCF intranet regarding kinship data in Connecticut. Lastly, I watched a series on engaging kinship caregivers, which was developed and facilitated by Dr. Joseph Crumbly. In regards to data collection, I started by developing a focus group protocol. This protocol was used in the focus group with 4 relative and fictive caregivers. These caregivers provided me with information on their experiences, as well as information on what would have been helpful for them to know prior to becoming a caregiver. I analyzed this data, which allowed me to develop a conversation discussion guide and training for staff. A conversation guide is a document that helps individuals know how to begin and sustain a conversation and is very helpful with challenging or sensitive topics. The goal of a conversation guide is to create a safe space for people to be authentic and vulnerable while paving the way for future conversations. I also developed a post-training feedback survey, which was distributed to staff following the training that I facilitated. And we will get into those results later in this presentation. Now let's look further into the interventions and methodology. So now that we have an understanding of kinship and fictive caregivers, the Quality Parenting Initiative, as well as shared parenting, let's look at how this challenge was addressed. I started by meeting with my mentor to brainstorm and discuss ways that we can improve our communication with our kinship providers, which would ultimately improve well-being and permanency outcomes for children. I attended a caregivers gala with my mentor that was hosted by the foster care division. This gala was held to show appreciation to foster parents as well as kinship providers. During the gala, I was able to interact with a few kinship providers. I also interfaced with two representatives from the Connecticut Alliance of Foster and Adoptive Families, which is an association dedicated to providing support, training, and advocacy services for foster, adoptive, and kinship caregiver parents. I then developed the focus group protocol, finalized the focus group participants, and held the focus group with 4 kinship fictive kin providers. This slide speaks to some of the background data on kinship care. The Department of Children and Families has embraced kinship care, with the percentage of children in Connecticut placed with kin at approximately 43%, while the national average remains around 33%. During one of the most trying times of a child's life, kinship care affords the child or children the opportunity to experience a familiar face, hug, and voice as they are on their paths towards healing and the goal of reunification with their parents. A study published by Casey Family Programs entitled "The Impact of Placement with Family on Safety, Permanency, and Well-Being" reports that the benefits of kinship care are widespread and substantial. The report found that youth who spent more than half of their time in care with family had fewer documented recent well-being challenges, such as those related to school, social functioning, adjustment to trauma, and social development. The study also found improved permanency. It reports that 87% of children living with family benefited from relational permanency compared to just 57% of children with no time living with family. An impressive 83% of children in kinship care achieved legal permanency compared to 38% of children with no time living with family. In July of 2023, I pulled our kinship data in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut during that time had 50% of children placed with kin, while the national average remained around 33%. Statewide, we had approximately 3,074 children in care. 41.1% of children were in relative care, and 8.6% were placed in special study fictive kinship care. The Department of Children and Families is divided into 6 regions. I currently work in Region 2, which consists of 2 area offices. In July of 2023, Region 2 had 510 kids in care, 33.3% of children were in relative care, and 11.1% were in special study fictive kinship care. Now, there are some feelings that relative or kinship providers may have. And Dr. Joseph Crumley, who is an expert in this area, he has traveled this country and facilitated multiple trainings with child welfare professionals, talks about some of the risk factors that relative or kinship providers may experience. He talks about the feelings of guilt, the understandable feelings of guilt that relative caregivers may experience as a result of changing family dynamics. He also discusses loss and ambivalence. Kinship Care creates interruptions of the caregiver's plans, priorities, space, and privacy. He later highlights projection and transference, the unconscious processes where we redirect our emotions from one person to another. He also talks about hope, fantasy, and denial. It is often difficult for relative caregivers to feel like they are giving up hope on people that they love. And lastly, he highlights loyalty. Kinship Care dramatically changes family dynamics and requires the shifting of roles, responsibility, authority, and loyalties. So let's look at who participated in my action research project. As I mentioned earlier, I held a focus group with 4 relative fictive caregivers. 2 were relative caregivers and the other 2 were fictive caregivers. These caregivers provided me with a wealth of information, which allowed me to develop the conversation discussion guide and training for staff. After developing the conversation discussion guide and training, I was able to facilitate this training with 16 staff, which consisted of our foster care director, which is also my mentor. There was a foster care program supervisor present during this training, several supervisors, several social workers, both from the foster care division and child protective services, as well as staff from the foster care division support staff. As I indicated earlier, I met with my mentor to brainstorm and discuss ways that we can improve our communication with our kinship providers, which will ultimately improve the well-being and permanency outcomes of children. I attended the Caregivers Gala and was able to interact with a few kinship providers. I interfaced with the KFAP liaisons and was able to identify the focus group participants. I finalized the focus group participants, scheduled the focus group, analyzed the data from the focus group, and created the conversation discussion guide and training. Now let's look at the evaluation and results. Following the training on the conversation discussion guide, I distributed a feedback survey in order to gather data on the staff's perspectives and if they felt that the guide would be helpful. 10 out of the 16 participants completed the survey, and the following slides are a breakdown of the survey results. However, before we get into those survey results, I want to discuss some of the challenges and limitations throughout this process. I would have loved the opportunity to hold another focus group with a different set of kinship providers in order to gather additional information on their perspectives, as well as to be able to do a comparison of the 2 groups to identify if their needs were the same. I would have wanted additional time in this fellowship to train more staff, as well as to pilot the discussion guide. However, due to time constraints, I was not able to do so. So let's look at the results. So out of the participants that completed the survey, as I indicated earlier, 10 out of the 16 staff completed the survey. 5 were from CPS, and the other 5 were from the foster care division. As a result of the training, my perception about shared parenting is more positive. The majority of staff felt that the training increased their knowledge of shared parenting and kinship providers. If time permitted, I would have loved to gain insight on the 20% of staff who disagreed and what additional information I could have provided during the training. To what extent did your perception regarding shared parenting and kinship families improve? And in this slide, we see that the majority of staff felt that their perception regarding shared parenting was positive as a result of this training. Do you intend to use the conversation discussion guide This slide shows that there were varying perspectives on whether the perception on shared parenting and kinship families improved. 50% fell under the category of to a great extent or quite a bit, while the other 50% selected somewhat or not so much. I was happy to see that the majority of the participants would use the conversation guide. I was also happy to see that all of the staff thought or perceived that the guide would be a useful resource. And lastly, all of the staff felt or perceived that the conversation discussion guide would help to prepare relative and kinship providers to have better communication and positive shared parenting. I also want to highlight that during the training, I did an activity with the group that participated, and I selected 2 supervisors to try out the guide. One of the supervisors played the role of social worker, while the other played the role as kinship provider. And following the activity, we had a very fruitful discussion regarding some of the real life issues that kinship providers discuss, specifically regarding resources that are available to them. So let's look at the lessons learned during the Action Research Project. In talking to the kinship and fictive kin providers, as well as during the training, I learned that we need to have consistent messaging, specifically regarding the relationship with the birth parents and what shared parenting looks like. We also need to be consistent in communicating the resources that are available for providers, as well as the risk factors that they may experience. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the conversation discussion guide training needs to be extended to various divisions in our agency, including our care line staff, which is often described as the front door of the department. It operates 24 hours a day and 365 days a year. Also, our investigation staff, as they are the first responders and a lot of times have the first contact with our kinship or fictive kin providers, and our adolescent staff, who deal with some of our most challenging population, which is our transitional age youth. I will continue to train staff on this discussion guide. I will pilot the guide statewide. I will also present this guide as well as the lessons that I learned throughout this project to my management team, as well as the foster care division leadership team. Myself, along with one of the foster care managers, will meet with our Quality Parenting Initiative caregiver support group to discuss lessons that we've learned from this project and continue to explore ways that we can improve. So I just wanted to briefly talk about the impact that MPLD has had on my life, both personally and professionally. I want to thank MPLD so much for selecting me to be a fellow in this cohort. Special thank you to Ms. Deb, to Dr. Harrison and Wadia, and the entire MPLD team for all of their support throughout this fellowship. I am truly grateful for this fellowship because I truly believe that it has helped to increase my confidence, both personally and professionally. I have really been able to connect the dots on how data applies to the work and why collecting data is so important. I learned more about policies and how they are developed and how policy impacts funding. I have also developed the conversation discussion guide and training that can be used within my agency. And I am very proud of this guide and proud to see that it's going to be piloted statewide. I have truly developed a connection with the Game Changers group. The group text and words of encouragement throughout this program is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And lastly, being able to network with child welfare professionals throughout the United States. I learned so much throughout this process. Special shout out to the leadership team in Connecticut, the Department of Children and Families, our Commissioner, Durantes, the executive team, my Assistant Chief, Sean Wright, my Office Director, Dr. Dakibu Mule, and last but definitely not least, my mentor throughout this process, Tony Lagan. Thank you for all of your support and encouragement throughout this program. The references that I used was from the Child Welfare Information Gateway, CAFE Family Programs, our own internal State of Connecticut Department of Children and Families intranet, and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation.